Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. In this video we're going to talk about setting up your red dot sight magnifier. Properly zeroed red dot is going to be able to allow you to shoot basically as far as you can see if you understand what your holdovers have to be. So it's entirely possible using a 50/200 zero or a 25/300 or a 100 meter zero. I can still hit out to 2, 3, 4, maybe even 500 meters depending on skill level, environment, how big the target is. Because positive identification is something that we want to have for self-defense purposes, regardless of occupation or use, magnifiers can be a very good, if you want to use the term force multiplier, to add to your rifle or your pistol caliber carbine or whatever you're using. Being able to see closer to the target without actually having to get closer to the target is a benefit regardless of firearm type. So the magnifier is something that some people do choose to use. Some people stay away from them because they feel like, oh, I tried it and I didn't really care for it. The eye relief was a problem. Just like on an optic, you've got windage and elevation knobs and they're not there for decoration. You actually do have to zero the magnifier after you've zeroed the optic. It's not the end of the world. It's actually not that big of a deal. And depending on how specific you want to be, you can literally, quote unquote, eyeball it. The reason it has to be zeroed is because it may not be perfectly in visual alignment in alignment parallax with the optic itself, the optic body, and of course the red dot, which is what you're looking for. I zero my optic independently at whatever distance I'm going to zero it at, and then I'm going to put my magnifier into position. Some people talk about that it has to be perfectly mated to the back of the optic. It doesn't. You can have a gap there based on needs. I like to have the magnifier back as far as I reasonably can, because of that eye relief issue. Especially on the 6X, the eye relief on the 6X is just as bad, if not slightly worse, when it comes to how close you have to be and how small an area of adjustment you're allowed to get away with before you start introducing too much, or well, I should say, just start introducing scope shadow period into your sight picture. So once I've got this optic zeroed, and I tend to do this by slaving the gun down into some kind of rifle rest, because that just makes it easier, I'm going to put it on my desired point of impact, and then I'm going to fold the optic, or I should say the magnifier, up, and I'm going to visually look at the process and see if anything has changed. If the optic, or I should say the magnifier, is out of alignment with the optic, the dot is going to appear in a different place than it did when you were looking with the naked eye. So what I have to do at this point is I have to reacquire my zeroed point of aim and fire a group. I got to fire whatever your 3 or 5. I recommend 5-round groups just to have a larger sample size. So with the magnifier in place, I'm going to fire that 5-round group. And if it's low and right, I'm going to make corresponding correction adjustments on the magnifier. And that's really it. It's not something you just get to throw on the gun. You can do a lot of the work just by eyeballing it, if you will, and making adjustments to bring that dot into the position you see it in the window when the magnifier is folded out of the way. So if my dot is centered high and I flip the magnifier up and it looks centered left, I already know I've got to make adjustments. But by shooting, make your adjustments and then shoot it, just like you would zeroing the red dot itself. It doesn't require a great deal of time investment. I think you'll find if you fine tune it, or I should say if you ballpark it prior to shooting those groups, it's not going to take you but 5, maybe 10 rounds, depending on how well you ballparked it, to get the magnifier zeroed to the rifle. If you do not zero the magnifier to the rifle, you're going to have fits, you're going to have problems, you're going to have a variance in point of aim, point of impact, because the magnifier is out of alignment, parallax alignment with the optic itself. It's no different than taking your head and moving it to where your dot isn't centered in the window. It's basically the same thing, but now you're doing it through a magnifier, which can, pun intended, maybe pun not intended, magnify the problem. So I'll give you guys a quick example of this. This was on my Lantac Raven, which is using the Unity Fast and the Unity Fast fold to center mount on the Aimpoint Micro and the Aimpoint Magnifier, 3X Magnifier. Here's a 5-round group of the gun zeroed with no magnifier being used. Now here's a second 5-round group, only having ballparked the magnifier before I actually put in any adjustments from shot placement. So I aligned it, I got it close to where I think it needs to be based on how the red dot's presentation looks in the window. Without the magnifier, flip the magnifier up, try to get the same picture. That's not where I'm going to be leaving it, that's just the ballpark adjustments I made before firing that first 5-round group to zero the magnifier. So as you can see, based on the zero distance, I got it pretty close just by ballparking it, but it wasn't perfect. So I dialed in my adjustments based on the math. You need to make the adjustments just like you would. Now, if I'm shooting, again, this is a 50-yard zero distance for a 50/200, if you want to call it that, zero. Dial in the adjustments according to that, and then shoot another 5-round group. So now I've got two 5-round groups that are virtually indistinguishable from each other at that distance because I zeroed my magnifier. It's not the end of the world. Just make sure that you zero the red dot first. Don't try to zero your red dot through the magnifier. You got to zero the red dot first. Otherwise, you're just going to constantly be playing with those two different aberrations and introducing all kinds of spatial distortions through parallax. And you may actually tear a hole in the time-space continuum or frustrate yourself so bad that you burn all your ammunition and go home from the range defeated. And that's not something we want to do. We always want to leave on a whim. Zero the red dot first, make sure the red dot's zeroed. I know some people want to take that shortcut of, oh, if I throw a magnifier on there, it's so much easier to get that 50-yard zero or that 25-yard zero. Zero the red dot first, get the best group you can, and slaving the rifle down is really the best way to do that. And then zero the magnifier, and then do standing shots if that's something you want to do to make sure that your zero is your zero. But there's really not much more to it than that. Once you properly zero the magnifier, you're not going to have problems. The caveat to that, or the asterisk to that, I should say, is if you're not accepting the fact that you have to probably change your cheek weld position depending on where you keep your stock on a collapsing stock rifle when you flip the magnifier up, because it actually has eye relief, whereas the red dot doesn't. So I'm going to have to move my head according to what eye relief, I should say, what the magnifier demands of me for eye relief. Can you still get hits without doing that? Absolutely. Shooting from 25 yards on steel plates, is very easy for me to snap that magnifier up, make no real changes, and still be able to hit that plate. But being able to get the hit, I'm accepting that there's parallax in that sight picture. So I'm not hitting exactly where that dot is based on where the scope shadow is being introduced into the magnifier. If I'm shooting at 50, 75, 100 yards, I have a little bit relative time to take the shot, and I think cleaning up that eye relief is even more important for those extended distance shots. Or if I'm trying to make a precision shot at a closer distance, I definitely have to make that adjustment to make sure I get my head in the right position to eliminate that scope shadow. I hope that answers any questions about magnifiers. Like I said, you know, if you get a good mount, they're great. It doesn't matter brand. I'm just particular to the aim point magnifier, but there's a lot of good magnifiers out there. The Vortex one is pretty good. American Defense Manufacturing makes one that's pretty good. You don't have to get aim point brand, but they all have to be zeroed. And if somebody's trying to sell you a magnifier that doesn't require being zeroed, don't buy it. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.